Welcome everybody to our board workshop, February 18th, 2025, a little after 5. Call to order, declaration of a quorum, 6 members, present, 1 absent. Welcome everybody. Thank you all for being here. Brings to item C, hearing of citizens. We do not have any for this workshop. Brings us to item D1, update on 124 from the Miss Chrissy Hester. The floor is yours.
Start again? Okay. Update 124 encompasses 53 legal policies, which you don't vote on, but I have given you in transmittal the explanatory notes and then the comparison notes where you can see where they have changed. So we don't have any choice over there, but you do vote on the local policies. There are 8 of those, and they cover financial ethics and investments. They cover intellectual property, and then employee standards of conduct. This is where they've decided to make the employee handbook kind of aligned to the student handbook in nicotine products and including vapes. Okay, I thought that was very interesting. Also, special programs. This includes some changes with the dyslexia rules in special education. And then gifted and talented students, they've decided that the local policy needs to have how they're regulating the funds and have a policy that regulates the funds for GT. And then for child abuse and neglect, they stayed in there, which is very interesting to me, that if you make a child report to CPS, you have to identify your name and be able to give them contact information. And then they say they will keep it confidential. What is always interesting to me about that is that anytime we make a CPS report, it is never confidential. The CPS investigator always tells them that the school made the report. So it's kind of interesting that they put that in local policy. And then the last one is conduct on school premises, and that's where they added vapes to, which we did all that in before school started. A lot of the updates in update 124 all took place in the 188, the last legislative session. So most of them are already, the legal ones that you will read about, they're already in process. We've been doing those already, but you can see the policy comparison, how it changed. And then the local ones are the ones that you will vote on hopefully next month, unless you have some questions. The local policies are the only ones we can add some changes to, and if we do that, we work with our policy consultant to put it in legal terms. So if you have any questions, let me know. There was a lot.
I was looking, is it, when would we approve it?
You don't approve it until the March meet. What is today? This is February, March.
So, okay.
Yeah.
Just making sure it wasn't on.
Yeah.
Yeah,
No,
tomorrow.
you've got time.
So if we have questions, get those to you before March or during?
Get them before March, because normally we put that on consent.
Okay,
So let me know before if you have any questions.
okay. Anything else?
I guess if there is anything that we want to alter or change, does it have to be approved one way or the other at the March meeting, or could it theoretically wait till April? Or?
It can wait.
Okay.
If you have some questions, whoever's in charge of whatever that policy is about, they'll take your input, and then we'll work with the policy consultant to see if that's what we want to do. Then they put it out in board terminology, and then you vote on it once it's formalized. But we would give that to you in that formal format.
Yeah, so any recommendations, we do not have any to recommend to the board of changing anything. If you had something that you wanted us to ask about, we could visit with our attorneys, but sometimes they may not be in support of changing the policy based on X, Y, and Z, but it does not hurt to have that conversation and see where they are to see if there's a compromise.
All right, thank you so much. That'll bring us to item D2, 25-26 budget discussion for the first time.
Yes, sir. We our leadership team, we're all in place now, and just really felt like as we're digging into the 25-26 budget that we wanted the input of the board, honestly, to provide us a little bit of a roadmap with what your goals, what your priorities are as a board. They do not have to be, this is your opinion as an individual board member. I've kind of got some talking points to kind of go through to get your idea of where we are. Just as a couple reminders, we are moving to a July 1st budget year, July 1st through June 30th. And so that is coming up, so it'll be a little 2 months earlier than normal. So what we're actually building this year is, a 10-month budget versus a 12-month budget. Heather has went through, and we have a 12-month budget that would basically result in about a $5 million deficit budget, give or take, of where that number is. Going off a 10-month budget, there will not be a realized deficit. So we will actually have monies at the end of June 30th that we would place into our fund balance. And we'll talk about fund balance here in a minute. But that's not a real actual gain. It's for 1 year because of 10-month. If we're building a 12-month budget, we're still looking at a deficit without us changing anything. So that's basically, I've got some talking points. We'll just kind of let the conversation go where it goes. And just kind of want to start off with, as a board member, what are your top priorities for this upcoming budget cycle?
I'm gonna open it up to whoever wants to kind of start and
I'll start.
kind of roll from there. Yep. Well, I mean, this is kind of a roundtable discussion, so not, hey, this is what we're gonna do, this is what I want to do. So, rock on.
Good deal. No, I would just continue to reiterate that, whatever, it could be painful in some ways, but that one of our requirements be that we not dip into the fund balance so much that it puts us in creates problems as far as having operating capital, having meeting requirements as far as financial stability, so forth and so on. And so being sure that we keep that minimum amount and not going under that is, seems like it's a necessity.
And let me give you some numbers real quick just to remind you guys. Our current fund balance is $43,905,000. That is total fund balance. 38.5 is unassigned and 3.9 is committed. That's about 3 months of operating expenditures. The recommendation when we go through our audit is between 3 and 6 months. Heather and I both feel much more comfortable if we're at 5 or 6 months in that fund balance versus at 3 months. We're still within that recommended level, but it's close. I mean, you're at that 3-month threshold. I sent you guys an article earlier this week from the Austin American-Statesman with the legislative session in place of where we are funding-wise. Those in the legislature have made the comment, we're at an all-time funding high for public education. That is true as far as the dollar amount. It's not true when you build in inflation. We are currently right now receiving less funding per student than we did in the 2010-2011 school year. That's factual, can't debate it. It's in the Austin American-Statesman if you'd like to go look at that. We're currently also receiving 18% less in funding from 2020. So the number that they're saying is true. It is at an all-time high, but you're ignoring the fact of the inflation gains, and we'll go through some of those data points here in just a little bit. So that's basically what we're looking at. The current two budgets from the House and Senate, it's preliminary budgets. It's not in stone at all, but none of those, the two budgets have zero increase to our basic allotment, which is true new funding for every school district if that number is adjusted. Without it being adjusted, many times additional funds is just a pass-through for us, potentially for raises that are earmarked depending on, how legislation's passed. So that gives you an idea of where we are with fund balance as you discuss your priorities.
I was just going to say that I agree with Josh, and I think part of what you're saying, that it's important for us to keep in mind that we can't just run a deficit indefinitely. And as trustees for our community and for our schools, we've got to make decisions. You guys have to make decisions as a school district so that we can continue to educate kids regardless of what the state does. None of us sitting, I suspect none of us sitting around this table really want to be talking about how to tighten our belts. Sometimes that's necessary, though, so that we can keep doing the work that we need to be doing to take care of our kids and our staff. I think the thing that's most disheartening to me is that if we were in a great recession and the state had no money, it would be a little easier to have the conversation about how to tighten up what we're spending, but that's not the situation that we're in. And so, that's what's really frustrating to me as a school board trustee, is to look at a situation where we were able to go to the recent BCS Chamber of Commerce Economic Outlook Conference, and we were able to hear from our state comptroller. And he went on for a long time talking about how Texas is the 7th largest economy in the world compared to other nations. I wrote down some numbers. He talked about how Texas is 20% of U.S. exports and 10% of our national economy, and how right now we're looking at, the number he threw out was $24 billion that they have to consider spending. And so we're not in a situation where our state has no money to fund us, and that is what's most frustrating, I think, for all of us sitting around this table. So as we have that discussion, and as the school districts around the state have to have those discussions, just to our community that we represent, know that they're really hard decisions, but ultimately making choices to tighten what we're spending is for the better of our kids, because we have to be able to continue to educate our kids no matter what happens at the state level.
I know since 84% of our budget is salaries, that's really, really hard to cut. I know Heather Wilson has done an excellent job. I feel like she's really sharpening her pencil. Have you and your team talked about where y'all see that if we don't get any additional funding, some obvious areas where we could start making some cuts that don't impact learning?
Yeah, we saved, we cut $1.2 million last year out of the budget that had zero impact on kids or programs. We're taking a deeper dive this year with the entire team in place. Heather's using what she calls a zero-based budgeting, meaning departments, campuses are starting with zero as their budget, and they're building their recommendations to us, basically to justify expenditures and why it's needed. We do feel like they're still fluffing those numbers, that we can get a little bit tighter than we have been. But the bottom line, you're talking about potentially a $5 million deficit budget. So, from a standpoint of nickel and diming this department's budget here, there, it really doesn't move the needle. With 84% of our budget being in staff salaries, the only way you're really going to move the needle is staff reductions. That's going to significantly move the needle. That brings in the conversation of class sizes, programs, and that's the point of having the conversation. In my mind, I don't want to do anything that impacts students or programs. Our programs are successful from fine arts, athletics, CTE, across the board. And we're not going to do anything that's going to compromise the success of our kids or our teachers' ability to lead these young men and women to the success that they're having with us and then when they leave us. So I think that's one of the questions is the expectation of the board that we pass a balanced budget? Or is the expectation that we don't impact kids and programs, and if it means a deficit budget, it means a deficit budget? Because I'm going to be honest with you, to wipe out a $5 million budget deficit with no additional funding, there would have to be a significant reduction in staff that's going to impact class sizes, and there's no room around that. You wouldn't have to do that. You could do it by attrition, and folks leave, you don't replace them. It wouldn't be that people lose their jobs, but it would have a significant impact on our class sizes, which impacts learning.
And that's one of the really sad parts about all this is, CSISD, for example, we don't necessarily pay as much as a lot of the bigger districts and metropolitan areas, but we've consistently had a more favorable student-to-teacher ratio, which is better for the kids, better for the teachers. And so, having to possibly decrease that that's one of the things that would be painful.
And if you did, last year we did a 2% raise. A 2% raise for us is approximately $2 million, just to talk whole numbers so you have an idea of what that looks like. That's obviously a huge part of what we do. Our staff works hard for us to ask them to operate on the same salary scales that they have considering inflation, which is what the state has done to us. But this board has generously, over the last 6 years, without receiving any additional funding, have provided raises to staff members each and every year. Whether that meant digging in fund balance or not, the thought process was taking care of employees first.
And on those same discussions, I mean, sometimes it is, or it may come down to, which I hate, a discussion between salaries or class sizes, right? You know, like we said, more, maybe more teachers, but maybe they're not getting a raise this year, right? I think our teachers, I would really hate to see class sizes increase. They already have in some places a little bit when some of that, the savings, I mean, I know there's different reasons, different places, and maybe not across the board, but our teachers, we all say that they are doing so much, and we ask them to do so much that I don't know if it's just more money that's the answer, right? Or if that's, I think to actually have a bigger classrooms, it seems like a heavy burden. And maybe the teachers need to speak up about this more, but that's what I hear and feel from a lot of people. And of course, there is data that shows that larger class sizes is worse for student performance. I mean, there's, you can handle up to some points, but you can't let that just, I would hate to see that have to grow too much. It would be very
I think in
unfortunate.
the end, and we're kind of ping-ponging back around, can't have it all. So, there's a give and take there of what that's going to look like. Some ideas that I've seen across the state, we have a K through 4 recommendation from TEA of 22-to-1 teacher to student ratio. If you're over that ratio, you submit a waiver to TEA that they approve. Some districts across the state I've seen are keeping the 22-to-1 ratio K through 1 and increasing third and fourth ratios to 24-to-1. And then taking a look across the district of what that would look like. And then through attrition, as third and fourth grade teachers leave, you hire less people, and then you bring that number up to 24-to-1. We have some classes right now across the district based on the ebb and flow of enrollment that aren't 22-to-1. There's some that are below, there's some that are 23, some that are 24, just depending on the campus and the time of the year. It fluctuates throughout the year. But from a staffing model, those are hard numbers that we can run to have an impact of where our numbers are right now in second and third grade currently. We're basically a flat enrollment district, so you would basically not look at any increase based on our demographer's report that we'll look at in March. And so then you anticipate if you had just big numbers, 10 teachers leave, you didn't replace those 10 teachers, we'd stay at 24-to-1 ratio, you're saving approximately $700,000. So that's just round numbers talking of what that looks like. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm saying it's options that I've seen a lot of districts exploring throughout the state. We set the numbers at the secondary levels, just so you know. Panay, what was at middle school and high school? Was it 25-to-1? So when we went through staffing models last year, our secondary campuses, we set it 25-to-1. That number is where we're at now. We could look at 27-to-1 and see what that potential number looks like. So those are all different models that our teams can run and figure out from a staffing standpoint what that looks like. With the number of teachers we have now, the number of teachers we would need to run different models.
Do you have any experience with out-of-district transfers? Has that been discussed at all as a possibility?
We have in a district that I worked in before, prior to me working there, you had out-of-district transfers. Basically, when student enrollment is up, more funding, obviously, that you receive. There are multiple larger districts in the Metroplex that used to be fast growth that are no longer fast growth that are offering out-of-district transfers this coming year. We've had the conversation. That is not our plan for 25-26, but without additional funding coming from the state potentially this year, it would be something we'd have to explore for 26-27. In the district that I previously worked in, it was not open enrollment. Those terms kind of get intermixed. You take out-of-district transfers based on qualifications, meaning there's an expectation for attendance, grades, discipline. The parent applies, submits all of that paperwork, and then you decide if they meet the criteria to be a out-of-district transfer. We could run funding scenarios. We're going to have, starting in March, looking at our demographer and start having conversations for 26, 27 on potential rezoning at the elementary, intermediate, and middle school levels, not at the high school levels. By having those discussions, and we're earmarking the board approving that potentially in October or November of 25, we would know. Let's say Heather ran a scenario, we could take 300 students, it would generate X amount of money. And these kids would go, this elementary, we would know the numbers. And so we would be able to earmark, if we took out of district transfers for students that qualified, we would place them at a campus. Transportation would not be provided, and we would decide what campus they would attend. That is an option for us to generate more income beginning in, like I said, 26, 27, or yes. Not for this coming year.
Lots of random thoughts here. Oh, go ahead, Kristen.
For students? Yeah, we covered it last month. We had, let me see, Heather just sent out emails. I believe there were 7 or 8 campuses that hit their attendance incentive. And so that money was transferred into their account. It helps. Yeah, we're trending right now a little less than half a percentage point. I want to say 0.4% above our attendance rates last year, which is significant. You know, even when you're talking 1%, that's significant. That's over 7 figures of funding. There are multiple bills out there right now that are entertaining funding us on enrollment versus attendance. That's been discussed more this session that I've seen in previous years. There's some that love the idea, some that hate it. Just to put in raw dollar form, we have 14,300 kids. Roughly about 95% of our kids come to school. So we're getting funding on a little less than 13.8, 13.9. If we got funded on enrollment and not attendance, that would be a bottom line $2.3 million gain to the district. And so we have to staff, 100% of our kids are coming every single day. That doesn't happen. I'm not for sure if it happens any day out of the entire year. But that's why the conversation is up. Read something the other day, in order for the state to fund on enrollment currently versus attendance, it would be between $2 and $3 billion additional in public ed funding. I'm going to think they're going to kick that can down the road, but we'll see.
Because I guess speaking of that, obviously we're early in the legislative session, but there's Senate Bill 2 that passed, and there's the proposal with some amount of money for public ed, but not really much more than it was 2 years ago. Do we know how much that would turn into for CSISD? Do we?
We haven't seen any metrics of what that would look like right now. Just to give you guys some raw numbers, since 2019, these are increased in our costs that we have no control over. Okay, so no new money since 19. We've had a 49% increase in fuel cost, 392% increase in insurance policies, 16% increase in utilities, and 26.6% increase in employee compensation. So we did control that number. Obviously, it's employees. Over our state and federal monies that we receive, we spend over $1.6 million more in special ed than we are funded, and $4.1 million in transportation costs than what we receive from the state.
To me, it's really disappointing to some of the information that's being put out by our governor's office, incorrect information, and one of the latest graphics saying that we get over $15,000 per kid Can you correct that? Because I think that's important for the people out there that hear us say we don't have enough money, and then they see a graphic like that. And can you dispute that for us?
Yeah, that graphic is misleading from a standpoint. It takes all of the monies and puts it into one pot from every district in the state. Federal money only goes to children and campuses that are considered at the poverty level of the state. So that's not an accurate number. Just some quick raw number math. We basically get $150 million a year from the state. With our 14,300 kids, that's approximately $10,400 per student. That's on average. Every student doesn't generate that. The misleading part is your students with disabilities generate the most money, and those resources are spent on that child. It's not divided up amongst all kids. And so that's extremely misleading. So 150 million is what we're basically currently getting. If you took the 15,300 number that the governor's office has put out that we're getting funded per kid, that would generate over $215 million, which would be $65 million more than we're getting. So I would love to see the 65 million, but that is an inaccurate number.
And I'll follow up on just the 10,000 number, which is, like you said, our average, and happens to be what the proposal is for ESAs or vouchers as well. And I think the other part of that that's misleading is because just what you were saying, I mean, our kids with no extra needs, right, or services, they get the 6,160, right? It is, right, very much skewed by some of the special services for some of our students. A flat voucher to a private schools for any student is not fair. There's a lot of things that aren't fair, especially when private schools will be able to control who comes into their classrooms. We take every student, and some have more money needed and more effort, but it's just certainly not a level playing field. So the other thing is that a lot of those numbers rolled up our INS into those numbers, right? And it's another important thing that we say when we go through the bonds, and we that money we can't use for our teachers. We can't use for our classrooms. In fact, we'll be approving the additions to our CTE tonight, thanks to our local community who does support our bonds and supports our schools. But we can't get more money locally from our community the way the system's set up. Not for our teachers, not for our classrooms, right? Because that money, our taxes, will go through Austin, and they will only give us enough back or amount back based on their formulas, right? Again, it's just disheartening to know that we do have a community that supports our schools, but the system doesn't allow us to get any more. And we have to, lots of schools have had to do this, change the fiscal year, right? Just to get through one more year of funding, right? How much more are we going to add to our fund balance from doing that? Do you have that number? Do we know?
We don't have a hard number right now that we feel confident publicly sharing. Yeah. I'd rather not guess. Give me another 2 months, then we'd have a pretty firm number. It'll be more than the deficit that we currently are sitting at.
Sure.
Yeah, it could be, I want to say, Amy had a rough number prior to Heather coming that it could be potentially 8 to 10 million, I think. But that was speculation, well over a year ago. But we need to see how the numbers are going to shake out.
I do think, as we get closer to that, I mean, as we say at this time of year, there's a lot of moving parts around the budget, more than usual right now. Being able to see that they have the graph of our fund balance and how it's changed over the years, and where they say that yellow line of where we thought it needed to be to meet the number of days, meet the, keep our bond ratings and important things like that. You know, where is that and where are we moving? Where do we estimate that we're going to be up against that? That's obviously a big piece of the decision, at least to me, to be able to see that would be helpful.
I mean, you're not gonna have a realized, I think, numbers of $5 million deficit budget. You're gonna put 10-month budget, you're gonna put more than that in savings for a year. If you don't do anything, kept things the same, increase salaries, next year you would look at potentially a little over a $6 million deficit, I would anticipate. So then you would take the money you put into fund balance for a year, you take that right back out, so you're still sitting at the same spot a year from now with 3 months fund balance, and we're anticipating, let's say, no new money from the state, and you're back the same place you are. So I think that's from a standpoint of we're sitting at a $5 million deficit budget. What's your expectations? Is it zero deficit next year? Is it half of that? I mean, I need some metrics of what you want me to potentially look at cutting that, because that gives us quite a bit of room and some direction of what that looks like.
So I want to make sure I understand what you're saying. You're saying that with the money that we don't know exactly what it's going to be, with the money that we're going to be able to put in because we've been on this shorter fiscal year, if we stayed kind of where we are right now, we think we could just use that money to cover the deficit for 1 year. Correct? Is that okay?
Yeah.
So, I mean, my thought is, because our legislature meets every other year, I think we really have to think of this as a 2-year thing and not a 1-year thing.
I agree.
And so my thought would be, if we can split that in half, we at least have a plan for the next 2 years until we get to the next legislative session.
Yeah, because you're going to get into final budget presentation to you guys at the June meeting. Actually, that'd be final approval at the June meeting. You know, if you went into a couple of special sessions, funding could potentially change in the special session. So whatever budget we set for July 1, we can always come back and amend that budget if we needed to. Let's say a ferry came in and sprinkled, teachers are getting X amount of raise, here's new money for you. We could always come back and do more than you approved to do for July 1. So it's not that can be amended at any point in time. So it's not in stone.
When will we have numbers on teachers like retiring? Like if we wanted to do a mix of reducing staff and maybe holding off on some raises, like, I don't know.
We do contracts here in April. And so as we get around spring break time, we ask campus principals to reach out to staff members who may be looking for other opportunities, which is honestly their route. And would just kind of give us a heads up if they're looking, if they think husband, wife may be transferred, if they're looking at retiring, the sooner we know, the better. The district has used federal monies, ESSER funds, the last 3 years, I believe, to give a one-time $500 bonus to let us know early. Those monies are no longer available, and I do not recommend us spending money for people leaving the district. We ask them to give us a heads up. It's their right if they'd like to or not. But that's generally when we'll start getting some traction around spring break until the end of the school year is kind of moving time for teachers, coaches, and folks looking and folks having to make a change for family or whatever's going on. It's a moving target. There's really nothing set in stone. We've just got to get working on our end of what that's going to look like for us. So,
all good points tonight. It's funny because it's not, but I remember when we were in COVID doing board meetings via Zoom, and me and Ben would go back and forth on the general fund, and I completely understood where his thought process was, but I was like, man, we need it for a rainy day, no pun intended, but we need it for a rainy day, but it seems like we have a rainy year every single year. And that's the unfortunate piece that we're having to battle against now. On top of the state of Texas making sure that we have underfunded mandates that public schools have to deal with, and only public schools, whether that, which are viable. I mean, security, things like that, completely understand. But when you're underfunding them, you know, we get holding the bag. That's fine. And not changing anything since 2019 on the basic allotment is a little frustrating. And if the layperson can't understand that, then we have a bigger problem. And so when I'm talking about what we have going on in Austin, and yes, we can talk till we're blue in the face. They're going to vote however they want to vote. We got to deal with it. But I think that even the ESSER funds that came out of COVID, that helped us limp along. And it put this pie in the sky that, oh, school districts are doing fine and all that. Yeah, but it, like you mentioned, it's gone. I mean, it is what it is. We don't have it anymore. And now school boards or school districts are having to figure out all that out. The other piece that, as a, you know, when you look at it from a business mind standpoint, you know, majority of your budget is wrapped up in your people. And it's what makes organizations and businesses run. I mean, that's just a fact of life. If you don't have your people, you don't have a successful business. I'm always an advocate for whatever we can do to help pay our teachers, our staff, and things like that, because we don't have what we have if we don't have them, and their morale is not high. And so I'm always going to be a proponent for that. And that might mean we have to take some situations. I loved your recommendation of, man, maybe we cut that in half, kind of, hate to say kick the can down the road, but it seems like that's what we have to do, especially in this situation. Saw an interesting article about, and you can plug in your own school district, but I think it was on, I don't even know what it was on. If this large voucher deal passes, what does that look like for your district? And I think it showed we would lose $5.8 million in funding. Well, that's on top of whatever deficit that we're, or whatever budget we have to look at in adopting there. It's frustrating, and we know that, and we say it every year. I don't want to have to dip into the general fund or deplete it, because I think I'm an optimistic person. I think there is light at the end of the tunnel. I think this might be a good situation. I don't know why, and I don't know what that looks like, but I have to hope for it, because you have to hope that realistic and logical thinking comes into play. And I know I'm stretching when I'm talking about who we're talking about having to advocate for us. We can only do so much, but every organization in some facet is having to figure it out. And we're just one of those organizations that is having to figure it out. Class sizes, reducing programming, department budgets, things like that. I mean, yeah, when times get tough, you tighten up the purse strings, but I don't know if Dr. Harkrider's there or someone else, you can only do that so much. I mean, you can only tighten up your fuel allowance so much until you start affecting programs and kids and things like that. So that being said, you know, as far as direction from my standpoint, I think we have to take the attitude that what truly makes us work, what truly is our face of our school district, and make sure that we are looking at that aspect, and then just hope that everything else falls into place. And I hate to use that word because it's not committal. But when we break it down, if we're not supporting our local side, and that's why we always ask, we want more local control, because the state telling us how we have to run our business when they don't even know how to run their business sometimes, when you look at it, it's very frustrating. And so we have to look at it in a standpoint that, you know, with our general fund, we want to make sure we can keep the lights on and keep bringing kids to school and things like that. But at the same time, we want to make sure we're going to have a school district to come home to and be able to open the doors to. And so I guess that, I know it's not a direct, hey, this is what I would like to see, but I think that's what we need to kind of focus on is, hey, what are we going to do to weather the storm now And maybe it's what you said, where we kind of decipher what works and how we can break those numbers up now. But how we can do that moving forward, and then hope for time to take care of itself and we get some good answers in the future. But I don't know.
I would just like to see us not go extreme in any stretch. Like I said, maybe a compromise. I like Kim's, like meet in the middle, but like I said, don't increase class sizes across the board.
Oh,
Don't
100%,
slash
yeah.
raises, because I do want to take care of our teachers because they are one of our biggest assets, and that's why our district is so great. So yeah, I really, like I said, as far as direction, I don't have a good answer because we're in a lose-lose situation, and just to echo, it's frustrating that in Austin, what's happening, and at some point you just hope common sense prevails and they send us some more money.
In the situation that we're in right now, I think we as a board have to realize that there is going to have to be money cut somewhere. I mean, I think we have to, as much as we don't want to have to do any of those things, I think we have to be able to, look at Dr. Harkrider and say, we recognize that there's a need to find that money from somewhere. And so we have to be willing to support some of that when it comes down.
Yeah, we'll run some scenarios. You guys have given us just enough direction of class sizes. I think we can come back with some scenarios and some adjustments there that aren't catastrophic at all. But as far as the bottom line deficit goes, could have a pretty significant impact on reducing that number without impacting programs. So we can bring you some numbers back. We may have a first glance at that, hopefully March, April board meeting to run different scenarios. We've got a program where we can run that and tell us current staffing, what that would look like, and just give you some idea of what potential savings could be. Another thing that we haven't touched on real quick that we've got to consider is health insurance. Currently, we're anticipating almost a 10% increase in our premiums. Remember, we had 392% increase in insurance policies since 2019. And so once again, it's potentially going up another 10%. So when you're looking at compensation packages for staff members, a lot of time, and staff members included, and I didn't when I was a teacher, coach, and even administrator, they don't pay attention to health insurance that they're taking for us because that number is taken out of their paycheck. It doesn't impact that bottom line. Unless you're looking at the deductions and it's $350 taken out for health insurance, you're just looking at what you're bringing home. So some things that we could offset, do we take on a bigger percentage of the 10%? And as you look at packages and less of a percentage raise, more of a percentage raise, and pass the cost on to the employees, a larger percent of the 10. So we're going out rebidding for insurance, so that's not a hard number, but that was an estimated number that we feel like is going to be in the ballpark. So there's different ways to put together compensation packages besides just the salary scale, but that would impact employees' bottom line.
I agree that we are going to have to look at making some reductions. But I think as long as we have a fund balance that is over our kind of needed limit, I mean, I think we need to use some of it. And yes, splitting that up over two, maybe even a little farther than that. So because I agree, I certainly don't want to do anything extreme on kind of on either side, to try to balance the little bits here and there to try to get there. Spend a little of fund balance, cut a little bit, and be prepared. Also, continue to advocate for more money. I mean, I just think if our community and our teachers hear how, tight the situation is, I think we have to continue to push Austin for more funds. We'll try to have some hope. It's hard sometimes, but we have to continue to push that because it's the students that will suffer, right? And our teachers, and then our students. And well, we could get into more of that, but I do want to ask. I mean, I know I told you I'm not a huge fan of the class size increases, and you've mentioned programs before, but maybe. And obviously, we have some amazing programs, both co-curricular sports, fine arts, but also, some specific classroom programs. Should we be looking at opportunities there? Especially, I mean, I know when you look at it as a part of the budget, the line items sometimes for some of those programs are not big, right? Except for when some of them fall under the teacher, as a teacher, you know. I just have to be honest about putting everything on the table and looking at, you know, is that somewhere that it makes sense to dig into? And maybe it's not a big enough percentage to make a difference, but I don't think it's fair to have our classroom teachers, you know, core classroom teachers feel the brunt of it when other programs are not. That's my personal opinion.
Well, all of our program teachers, instructors, whatever they're all classroom teachers as well. So, and some of them, depending on the program they're in, they have a lot of kids in the classroom anyway. Take PE teachers, for instance. There's not 25 to 1 in a PE class. There's 50, 60 or more. It really doesn't move the needle. Some of the programming things that I have seen, you've taken coaches that have multiple athletic periods, you reduce that to 1 athletic period, not 2. You're picking up a section of teaching. It's not moving the needle. I mean, it's just not, you know, and you're in essence, in my opinion, hurting programs, because if you have a varsity level, let's say football coach that is in the freshman athletic period and varsity athletic period, it's important for that varsity coach to be on the development of your freshman programs and your kids, which leads to success. Same thing on basketball, baseball, it really doesn't matter. Picking up, let's say you had 20 coaches and you're picking up 20 sections, helps a little. I think it does more damage than help in the long term of what you're doing in your program. If our goal is we don't want to inhibit programs, then I think that's something you got to take into account. There's no right or wrong answer, and believe me, the squeeze, it's not easier any way you look at it. So you could put everything up on a wall and which one's better than the other. We sit here all night, you're not going to be able to rank the ones you want to do and not. And so we totally understand that. But I think it would help. I'm good with this. We can come back and run you scenarios of what that looked like. We can run scenarios of what our current ratios are, K through 4, same thing in intermediate, same thing middle and high schools. What are the class averages? And then run scenarios. If those were tweaked, what does that look like? You know, the other part is, and Kim made the point of, it's a 2-year thought process. So if you didn't do anything this year and you had the savings technically from the 10-month budget, so you're flat for 25, 26. Then you run another deficit in 26, 27. You're not within the 3 months anymore. So that's the rub. So there's got to be a reduction to stay within the 3 months, or you're penalized on your audit. And without any new funding on a 2-year biennium, we've got to do something. Otherwise, you're outside of the 2 months scenario, or the 3 months. And the 3 months is the minimum. I mean, obviously, you would love 6. It's funny, they even penalize you somewhat if you have more than that. I don't understand that, but it is what it is. But, I mean, that's the question. But it gives us and our team an idea to come up and give you scenarios, get your input, and then we kind of go from there. We keep our fingers crossed and continue to advocate for additional funds. Right now, the initial glimpse is not positive. It could change, and so we'll see how things shake out in the House. They will hear Senate Bill 2 in committee within the next 2 weeks. Once it's heard in committee, that's when it can be heard on the House floor, and so we'll have an idea pretty quick of what that looks like. If there's definitely not an agreement of what vouchers look like, that's a win for us. If Senate Bill 2 runs through the House and it's approved, that's a big problem for us. The Senate wants the vouchers bad enough, they will compromise more money for us to get it. And so that puts us in a good situation if we were to be in that. So we'll just have to wait and see.
Anything else? All right, that'll bring us to E, adjourn.